They asked me
Look
to
at
move my
that.
seat on a Christmas flight like it
Beautiful,
was
isn't it?
nothing. I could see it in their
But we
eyes.
need to be quiet now.
I wasn't the right kind of passenger. What they didn't know was who I really was, or what I quietly paid for. I never expected Christmas morning to feel heavy. Airports are usually loud and rushed, but that day felt different. People smiled more. Some wore ugly sweaters. Kids dragged new toys behind them. I stood in line at the boarding gate with my son, Malik, holding my coffee in one hand and his small fingers in the other. Malik was 7, curious, talkative, still at the age where flying felt magical. "This plane is big," he said, looking through the glass windows. "It is," I smiled. "Bigger than the last one." We were flying from Atlanta to Denver to visit my sister. It was our first Christmas together in 5 years. I had planned everything carefully. Gifts wrapped. Snacks packed. Seats chosen weeks in advance. I always choose my seat early, not because I'm picky, but because I've learned. I like the aisle. Close to the front. Easy exit. Less stress. I paid extra for those seats without a second thought. Comfort matters when you work as hard as I do. Our boarding group was called. We stepped onto the plane, greeted by a flight attendant with a practiced smile. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I replied. We walked down the narrow aisle, Malik counting the rows under his breath. Row 7, seats C and D, just where they should be. I placed our bags overhead. Malik climbed into his seat by the window. "Mom, we're really close," he whispered excitedly. I smiled. I liked that for him. I wanted this trip to feel special. As more passengers boarded, the plane slowly filled. I noticed people glancing at us. Not staring, just looking. I've lived with that look my whole life. You learn to recognize it. Curiosity, judgment, assumption. I brushed it off. Christmas was not the day for that energy. A white couple sat across the aisle. The woman smiled at Malik. The man nodded at me. Normal. Fine. Then a family boarded. A white woman in her late 30s, 2 kids, and an older man who I assumed was her father. They paused near our row. The woman looked at her boarding pass, then at our seats, then at us. She frowned. She leaned toward the flight attendant. "I think there's a mistake," she said. The attendant checked the passes. "No, ma'am. These are your seats," she replied, pointing to the row behind us. The woman's smile disappeared. She sighed loudly and stepped into her seat, clearly annoyed. I didn't think much of it. People get cranky while traveling. I buckled Malik in and handed him his headphones. "We're going to take off soon," I said. That's when the first tap happened. A light touch on my arm. I turned around. It was a different flight attendant this time. Younger. Blonde. Her smile was tight, not warm. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly. "Could you step out into the aisle for a moment?" My stomach tightened. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "Just a quick question," she said. I stood up. Malik looked confused. "Mom." "I'll be right here," I said calmly. The attendant leaned in closer, so others wouldn't hear. "Would you be willing to switch seats?" she asked. I blinked. "Why?" I asked. "There's a family who would like to sit together," she replied. I looked past her. The family behind us was already seated together. 2 kids. 1 adult on each side. "They are sitting together," I said. She hesitated. "Well, they would prefer these seats," she said, glancing at our row. I felt it then. That familiar heat in my chest. "Are you asking everyone in this section," I asked slowly, "or just me?" Her smile stiffened. "I'm just asking if you'd be willing," she repeated. "Where would we be sitting?" I asked. She pointed toward the back of the plane. Row 28. Middle seats. Middle seats. On a full flight. On Christmas. I paid extra to avoid that. "I'm not willing," I said calmly. "We're seated where we paid to be." Her expression changed. Just slightly. "I'll need to check with my supervisor," she said. "Please do," I replied. I sat back down. Malik leaned toward me. "Mom, are we moving?" he whispered. "No," I said softly. "We're staying right here." I could feel eyes on me now. The couple across the aisle avoided looking at me. The woman behind us sighed again. I focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I have sat in boardrooms with men who doubted me. I have pitched ideas that were ignored until repeated by someone else. I have learned how to stay calm when disrespected. This was not new, but it still hurt. The supervisor arrived a few minutes later. Older, confident, authority in his walk. "Ma'am," he said, smiling, "we're wondering if you'd be flexible today." "No," I said. "I won't be." He raised his eyebrows. "It's Christmas," he said lightly. "We're just trying to accommodate everyone." "So am I," I replied. By sitting in the seat I paid for. There was a pause. The plane was quiet now. People were listening. The supervisor nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Enjoy your flight." He walked away. No apology. No explanation. Just that. Malik squeezed my hand. "You did good, Mom," he said. I smiled at him, but my heart was heavy. As the plane began to taxi, I stared out the window. I thought about how easily I was asked to move, how natural it felt for them to assume I would say yes. I wondered if they would have asked the man in the expensive suit across the aisle. I wondered if they would have asked someone who looked different. I didn't say anything else. I didn't complain. I didn't raise my voice. But as the plane lifted into the sky, I knew something. This flight was not over yet. And they had no idea who they had just tried to move. Once the plane reached the sky, everything became quieter. Not peaceful, just heavy. The engines hummed. Seatbelt signs stayed on. People settled into their little bubbles. Screens flickered on. Trays clicked open. Life continued like nothing had happened. But inside me, something was unsettled. Malik pressed his face to the window, watching clouds drift past like mountains made of cotton. "Mom," he said, "are we above the snow?" "Not yet," I answered. "Soon." He nodded, satisfied, and put his headphones back on. I watched him for a moment. His small shoulders. His relaxed posture. I hated that even for a second, someone had tried to make him feel like he didn't belong there. That was the part that stayed with me. I've dealt with things my whole life. Subtle things. Quiet things. The kind that don't make headlines, but leave marks anyway. But when it touches your child, it feels different. A drink cart rolled down the aisle. The same blonde flight attendant stopped at our row. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. "Water, please," I said. She handed it to me without meeting my eyes. I thanked her anyway, not because she deserved it, but because I refused to become bitter. Still, I noticed things after that. The way she lingered longer at other rows. The way she avoided ours unless necessary. The way the woman behind us kept shifting, sighing, muttering under her breath. At one point, I heard her whisper, "Unbelievable." I didn't turn around. I stared straight ahead and reminded myself why I was on that plane. This trip mattered. 5 years earlier, my sister and I had promised we wouldn't spend another Christmas apart. Life had other plans. Work, distance, grief, the pandemic. Excuses piled up easily. This year was different. This year, I had finally said yes to myself. I had taken time off. I had blocked my calendar weeks in advance. I had ignored the voice in my head that always said, "You can rest later." Later never comes if you don't claim it. Malik leaned over again. "Why did that lady want our seats?" he asked quietly. I took a breath. "Sometimes people think they deserve things just because they want them," I said. "That doesn't make it true." He thought about that. "Like when kids try to cut in line?" he asked. I smiled a little. "Exactly like that." He nodded, satisfied again. Kids understand fairness better than adults sometimes. About an hour into the flight, turbulence hit. Nothing serious, but enough to make people grip armrests. Malik's eyes widened. "It's okay," I said, placing my hand over his. "The plane is strong." He squeezed back. That's when the supervisor walked past again. Slower this time. His eyes flicked toward me, then away. I wondered what he was thinking. Did he believe he had handled the situation well? Did he even remember it? Or was it already filed away as just another difficult passenger moment? For me, it wasn't small. It never is. I opened my bag and pulled out my notebook. I write when my mind needs order. Just bullet points. Thoughts. Reminders. I wrote row 7. Asked to move. No apology. Then I paused. I didn't know why I was writing it down. I wasn't planning to complain. I wasn't angry enough for that. I was tired. Tired of being flexible. Tired of being expected to accommodate. Tired of being the easy choice. The man across the aisle leaned over. "Hey," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say that wasn't right." I looked at him, surprised. "Thank you," I said. He shrugged. "My wife and I saw it. You handled it well." His wife nodded in agreement. That small moment mattered more than he probably realized. Because often these things happen in silence. No witnesses. No acknowledgement. Just you and the feeling that maybe you imagined it. I hadn't imagined this. The rest of the flight passed slowly. Malik slept. I stared at the seatback screen without really watching. Somewhere over the Midwest, the captain announced our descent. People stirred. Bags were unbuckled. Phones came out. The woman behind us stood up immediately after landing, bumping into my seat. "Sorry," she said flatly. It didn't sound like an apology. I stayed seated until it was our turn. No rush. When we finally stood, the blonde attendant was near the front again. "Have a good holiday," she said automatically. I looked at her. "I hope you do too," I replied. She hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. As we stepped off the plane, Malik looked up at me. "Mom," he said, "are you okay?" I knelt down to his level. "I am," I said honestly. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. What matters is knowing your worth." He smiled. "I know yours," he said. That almost broke me. We walked into the terminal, lights bright. Holiday music playing softly overhead. People hurried, to baggage claim, to reunions, to warmth. I thought the moment was over. I was wrong. Because what happened next didn't happen on the plane. It happened because of what I do when I land. And because someone somewhere had finally decided to look at a name they usually didn't pay attention to. And when they did, things started to shift. Quietly. Decisively. The terminal in Denver smelled like coffee and cinnamon pretzels. Christmas music played softly, the kind you barely notice until it stops. Malik skipped a little as we walked, pulling his small rolling bag behind him. I checked my phone. 3 missed notifications. That caught my attention. I don't usually miss messages. Not on travel days. I keep my phone on silent, but my watch vibrates. This time, I hadn't felt it. I stopped near a window and opened my inbox. 2 emails. 1 text. All from people who normally don't reach out unless something is important. The first email subject line read, "Quick question. Are you traveling today?" The second one said, "Need 10 minutes when you land." The text message was short. "Call me when you're free." I frowned. Malik tugged my sleeve. "Mom, can we get hot chocolate?" "In a minute," I said. "Let me just check something." I stepped to the side and called the number from the text. She answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Why?" There was a pause. "You flew in on flight 318, right?" I stopped walking. "Yes," I said slowly. "Why?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Did anything unusual happen on that flight?" she asked. I looked around the terminal. People everywhere. No one paying attention to me. "Why are you asking?" I said. "Because your name popped up in a report," she replied. I exhaled. So that's what this was. I didn't answer right away. "Nothing major," I finally said. "Just the usual." She sighed. "I thought so." "Thought what?" "That they would do something careless," she said. Again. I leaned against a pillar. "Who is they?" I asked, even though I already knew. She didn't answer directly. "Are you with your son?" she asked instead. "Yes." "Okay. Enjoy your time with your family," she said. "We'll talk after the holiday." Before I could ask anything else, she hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand. Malik looked up at me, hot chocolate forgotten. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything's fine." That wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. We picked up our bags and met my sister near baggage claim. She hugged Malik tight, then me. "You look tired," she said quietly. "I am," I admitted. At her house, later that evening, after Malik fell asleep, I sat on the couch with my laptop open. The house was quiet. Snow fell outside the window. I logged into my work email. There it was. A forwarded internal message. No greeting. No explanation. Just a screenshot. It was a passenger incident report. Passenger declined seat change request. Situation resolved. No further action required. I stared at it. That was it. No context. No reason. No acknowledgement of how or why the request was made. Just a box checked. I scrolled. Below it was my name. Full legal name. Correct spelling. And next to it, a tag. High value partner. I closed my laptop slowly. They had known. Not on the plane. Not in that moment. But soon after. The airline didn't see me as just another passenger once the system did what systems always do. It connected dots. My ticket. My email. My frequent flyer number. My corporate profile. The one tied to contracts. The one tied to funding. The one tied to decisions made far away from cabin aisles and seat numbers. I don't talk about what I do for a living. Not because I'm hiding it, but because titles change how people listen. And I prefer to be heard without them. I work in logistics. Not the kind people imagine. Not warehouses and forklifts. I work in systems. In infrastructure. In planning. The kind of work that makes movement possible. Airplanes don't just fly because they have wings. They fly because someone makes sure the parts arrive. The fuel is there. The schedules align. For years, my company had quietly partnered with major airlines. Not one. Several. We weren't flashy. We didn't advertise. We solved problems before they became news. I had signed off on renewals. Approved budgets. Pushed through expansions. I had sat in meetings where people talked about passenger experience like it was an abstract idea. I wondered if any of them had ever been asked to move from a seat they paid for. My phone buzzed again. Another email. This one was longer. Carefully written. It thanked me for being a valued partner. It mentioned a recent interaction. It said the airline was reviewing internal procedures. No apology. Not yet. Just awareness. I closed the email. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Because the thing about power is this. It only seems to matter once it's recognized. And I hadn't wanted recognition. I had wanted respect. The next morning was Christmas. Malik tore open gifts. Laughed. Forgot about the plane completely. I watched him and made a quiet promise. He would grow up knowing his worth without needing a title to prove it. But someone else had a different kind of awakening coming. Because after the holiday, conversations would happen. Questions would be asked. And that simple checkbox, situation resolved, was about to be reopened. Not loudly, not angrily, but thoroughly. The morning after Christmas, I woke up early. Not because I had to, but because my mind was already busy. Snow covered the street outside my sister's house, quiet and clean, like the world had pressed pause. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop closed, telling myself I would not check email yet. I had promised Malik this trip would be about family, not work. Still, the feeling that something was shifting stayed with me. It was subtle, like pressure in the air before a storm. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Once. Then again. I ignored it at first. I helped Malik build a puzzle. I listened to my sister talk about her new job. I laughed at things that didn't really matter. But when the phone buzzed a third time, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. This time, the message wasn't vague. It was direct. It asked if I had 10 minutes to talk. It used my full name. It came from someone senior enough that they usually didn't reach out personally. I agreed to the call, but I didn't rush. That was important to me. For once, I wasn't the one adjusting my schedule. When I finally called back, the voice on the other end was warm in a way that felt practiced. Polite. Careful. They thanked me for taking the time. They asked if my holiday had been pleasant. Only then did they bring up the flight. They called it a misunderstanding. They said the crew had followed protocol, but the protocol itself might need review. They said words like feedback and experience and alignment. I listened without interrupting. I've learned that people reveal more when you let them keep talking. What struck me most was the shift in language. No one asked me to be flexible now. No one suggested it was just Christmas stress. They wanted to understand how I felt. They wanted to make sure I felt valued. They wanted to ensure this didn't happen again. The same situation that had been brushed aside in the air was now being handled with gloves on. I answered calmly. I told them exactly what happened. Not with anger. Not with drama. Just facts. Who asked me to move? What was said? Where they wanted to send us? The silence on the line grew heavier with each detail. When the call ended, I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity. This wasn't about my seat anymore. It never really had been. It was about how easily some people are asked to shrink, and how quickly the system responds once it realizes it asked the wrong person. That truth sat with me for the rest of the day. Later that evening, after Malik was asleep, another email came in. This one included the word apology. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. But it was there, in writing, where it mattered. I closed my laptop and stared out the window at the snow again. I thought about the woman behind me on the plane, about the flight attendant's tight smile, about the supervisor who walked away without saying sorry. None of them knew what had followed me off that flight. None of them knew the conversations that were happening now. And maybe that was the point. Change doesn't always come with a confrontation. Sometimes it comes quietly, through systems and meetings and policy updates that never make the news. Still, I knew this wasn't finished. Because apologies mean very little without accountability. And somewhere between that checkbox in a report and the careful tone of those emails, there was a gap. A gap that deserved to be addressed. Not for me alone, but for the next woman, the next child, the next person asked to move simply because they seemed like the easiest choice. A few days after Christmas, life started to feel normal again. Malik went back to his routines. My sister returned to work. Snow melted into slush. On the surface, everything moved on. But underneath, things were still unfolding. I was back at my desk when the calendar invite came through. Not a phone call this time. Not an email filled with soft language. A meeting request. Multiple names attached. High-level names. The subject line was simple. Follow-up, passenger experience review. I stared at it for a long moment before accepting. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew exactly what that meeting meant. They were no longer reacting. They were responding. When the video call started, faces filled my screen one by one. People in neat offices, neutral backgrounds, calm expressions. The kind of professionals who choose every word carefully. Someone thanked me again for my time. Someone else mentioned how much the partnership mattered. Then they asked me to walk through the incident once more. I did. Slowly. Clearly. Without emotion. When I finished, there was a pause. Then someone asked a question that surprised even me. Why do you think you were selected to move? The room went quiet. I didn't rush to answer. I wanted them to sit with that question. Because it wasn't abstract. It wasn't theoretical. It was specific. I think, I said finally, that I looked like the least complicated option. No one spoke. I wasn't loud, I continued. I wasn't in a suit. I was traveling with a child. And historically, people like me are expected to accommodate without complaint. Still silence. Then I added, that expectation doesn't come from policy. It comes from habit. That's when the tone shifted again. They started asking different questions. Not about the flight. Not about the seating chart. But about training. About assumptions. About how crew members decide who to ask and who not to ask. Someone admitted that discretion often plays a role. Someone else admitted discretion can be biased. No one argued with me. That mattered. By the end of the meeting, there were action items. Reviews. Updates. Mandatory refreshers. Not because I demanded them, but because once the truth was spoken plainly, it couldn't be unseen. When the call ended, I sat back and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I wasn't celebrating. I was thinking about Malik, about how close he came to watching his mother quietly give up space she had earned, about how easily that lesson could have settled into him without words. That night, he asked me why I'd been working late. "Just fixing something," I said. He nodded. "Did you fix it?" "I'm trying," I answered honestly. He smiled. "You always do." And in that moment, I realized something important. Power doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like staying seated. Sometimes it looks like asking the question no one wants to answer. And sometimes it looks like making sure the system learns, even if it only listens once it recognizes your name. The changes didn't happen overnight. They never do. That's something people don't talk about when they imagine accountability. They picture a moment, a scene, a clear ending. Real life doesn't work that way. Real change happens quietly in follow-up emails, revised documents, and meetings that don't include applause. A week after the call, I received a summary. Not just words, but actions. New guidance for seat change requests. Clear rules about who can be asked and how. A requirement that the reason must be stated plainly, not dressed up as a favor. A note about children traveling with a parent. Another about avoiding assumptions based on appearance or perceived flexibility. I read every line carefully, not because I didn't trust it, but because I wanted to see if it was real. It was. I forwarded it to a colleague with a short note. "This matters." She replied almost immediately. "I know. Thank you." That response stayed with me, because while this had started with me, it was never just about me. Every woman who has been asked to shrink, every parent who has swallowed discomfort to keep the peace, every person who has been told, without words, that their comfort mattered less. None of them would know this change came from a single Christmas flight, but they would feel it. Malik and I flew again a month later. Different airline, different route, same quiet test. I watched the boarding process closely, not with fear, but with awareness. No one asked us to move. No one looked twice. We sat, we buckled in, we flew. As the plane lifted, Malik leaned toward me. "Mom," he said, "I like flying with you." I smiled. "Why?" "Because you don't let people push you," he said simply. I swallowed. That was the aftermath that mattered. Not the emails. Not the policy updates. Not the carefully worded apologies. The lesson my son absorbed without a lecture. Later that week, I ran into someone from the airline at an industry event. He recognized me immediately. Spoke carefully, respectfully. He mentioned the updates in passing, as if they were routine, as if this kind of reflection should have always been there. I nodded. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Because the truth is, I didn't want special treatment. I never did. I wanted fairness to feel normal, not exceptional. I wanted dignity to be automatic, not negotiated. That flight taught me something too. It reminded me that silence is often mistaken for agreement. That calm is often mistaken for weakness. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to move, not physically, but inwardly. Refuse to doubt yourself. Refuse to minimize the moment. Refuse to let it pass without meaning. The world didn't change because of me, but a small part of one system did. And for now, that was enough. Weeks passed, and the incident slowly became part of my memory rather than my present. Life returned to its usual rhythm: meetings, deadlines, Malik's school activities, grocery runs, and the ordinary buzz of everyday life. Yet, there was a subtle shift that I noticed when I reflected on the Christmas flight. It wasn't the public acknowledgement. There wasn't a viral story or a news headline. It was quieter than that, but far more satisfying. One morning, I received an unexpected message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A former airline executive who now worked in a different sector, but remembered the partnerships I had supported. She simply wrote, "Heard about the flight incident. You handled that beautifully. Not many would." I paused before replying, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I realized that the power of that moment had never been in confrontation or in a dramatic revelation. It was in consistency, in knowing my worth and refusing to shrink when I was asked to. That principle had always guided me in my work, and now it had quietly extended into a personal setting where it mattered even more. Malik came into the room, tugging at my sleeve. "Mom, can we go to the park today?" he asked. I smiled at him, nodding. As we bundled up, I thought about the invisible threads of influence that the flight had triggered. Policies changed. Training materials updated. People had conversations behind closed doors that might never be publicly acknowledged. The ones who had assumed they could ask me to move seats without consideration were now quietly reminded that assumptions can be dangerous. On the plane ride back home a few days later, I observed the crew and the passengers in a way I never had before. Nothing dramatic happened. No one singled us out. No one whispered. No one asked us to switch seats. Everything was seamless. Yet, I couldn't help noticing the subtle deference in their attention when my boarding pass was scanned, a recognition that, consciously or unconsciously, they had learned something. At home, I shared the story with my sister over coffee. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't exaggerate. I simply told her what had happened, how it had been handled afterward, and how small actions behind the scenes often create bigger ripples than any confrontation could. She listened, eyes wide. "You're always calm," she said, "but this time you showed them." I smiled, thinking about what I would tell Malik when he was older. The story wasn't about power or anger. It was about awareness, about noticing how systems work, and knowing that change can happen quietly if you refuse to be overlooked. That, I realized, was the real lesson. The final piece of recognition came months later. A brief note from the airline's corporate office, tucked into my email among routine business updates. "Thank you for helping us recognize an area for improvement. Your feedback and experience have contributed to policy adjustments that will affect thousands of passengers positively." No fanfare. No public apology. No viral headline. Just acknowledgement. Simple, clean, effective. And that, somehow, felt more powerful than any confrontation could have been. I looked at Malik playing in the living room, thinking about how subtly influence works, how quiet acts, small refusals, and calm confidence can create a ripple effect. I realized the story of that Christmas flight would always be part of me, but its greatest impact wasn't on me. It was on the systems, the policies, and most importantly, the next person who might have been asked to move without question. And that, in its own quiet way, was a victory. Christmas came and went, but the story of that flight stayed with me, not as an incident, but as a lesson. Malik never forgot it either, though he didn't need every detail. He remembered the feeling of his mom sitting her ground, calm and confident, refusing to be shuffled aside simply because someone assumed she would. That feeling, I realized, was the real gift. Months later, as life returned to its normal rhythm, I reflected on the chain of events. The seat request, the tense silence in the aisle, the emails, calls, and meetings afterward. Each moment seemed small in isolation, but together they formed a complete arc, a narrative that was about more than a flight. It was about respect, dignity, and the quiet assertion of worth. It was about being seen, even when others hoped you would remain invisible. I told Malik that story one evening as we decorated a small tree in our living room, the glow of fairy lights reflecting in his eyes. "You know," I said, "sometimes people will ask you to give up what's yours just because they think it's easier for you to say yes. But that doesn't mean you have to." He nodded seriously. "Like on the plane," he said. "Exactly," I replied. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay seated, not just in your seat, but in your worth." I didn't tell him all the corporate details. That wasn't necessary. What mattered was the principle. Dignity doesn't need drama. Change doesn't always need noise. And fairness doesn't require applause. These lessons, lived quietly, have a way of spreading farther than anyone expects. Later that year, the airline followed up with me formally, sharing the results of their internal review. Policies had been updated, training programs revised. Staff were reminded of the importance of equity in passenger treatment. The incident report that once dismissed my experience as resolved had transformed into a reference point for change. The system had learned quietly, efficiently, and effectively, because someone refused to be invisible. Looking back, I realized that the flight had been a mirror of life itself. The challenges weren't dramatic, but they were real. The discomforts weren't flashy, but they were meaningful. The true victories weren't in confrontation or recognition, but in remaining calm, speaking clearly when necessary, and ensuring the system, whether a flight, a company, or society, recognizes the worth of everyone. As Malik and I flew back home for the next holiday, I watched him watch the clouds, imagining mountains made of cotton again. I felt a quiet pride, not for myself, but for the lesson he carried with him. The knowledge that dignity can't be taken, fairness can be insisted upon, and sometimes, simply refusing to move is the strongest statement of all. That Christmas flight had started as a small, stressful incident. It had ended as a story of subtle influence, quiet power, and lasting change. And in the years to come, both Malik and I would remember it not as a tale of discomfort or racism, but as a testament to the quiet strength it takes to hold your ground, even when no one is watching, and even when the world expects you to move. Because that, above all, is the real Christmas lesson. Dignity is yours, and no one can ask it away.